We are deeply familiar with the Sith apprentice and master dynamic from across ages. It is one of the most consistent patterns in all of Star Wars history, as durable as Beskar, and as ancient as the first Sith tribes themselves. The formula is brutally simple. The master possesses the knowledge, the power, the secrets of true Sith dominance, and the apprentice hungers for that knowledge. This imbalance is not a flaw in the Sith design, it is the design. Every Sith Master lives under an invisible countdown, a timer that ticks towards one of only two endings: destruction by an external enemy, or destruction at the hands of the apprentice they themselves have empowered. And while Sith doctrine demands the knowledge be passed on, it also encourages something equally important: restraint. Power is not meant to be gifted, it's meant to be earned, seized, and taken. Yet in the lore there exists one extraordinary case where this ancient pattern appears to fracture, where the rules bend, where ritualized scarcity are replaced by something almost unthinkable in the tradition of the Sith. An open transmission, unfiltered teachings, a master who did not meaningfully withhold knowledge from his apprentice, but gave it freely, creating one of the most powerful Sith apprentices, maybe the most powerful Sith apprentice in all of the lore. The Sith Master that imparted this was Naga Sadow, the Sith Lord that we have examined many times before in the channel, often through the lens of his catastrophic design to drag the Sith Empire into the Great Hyperspace War, immediately after the death of their leader Marka Ragnos, a conflict that did not elevate the Sith, but it exposed them. This ultimately invited the Jedi and the Republic to pursue Naga Sadow back into Sith space, where ancestral worlds were stripped of artifacts, knowledge, and even the bodies of the dead. But astonishingly, this was not the mistake that sealed the fate of Naga Sadow. His final error was more personal, more Sith. He created an apprentice who rose to unprecedented power and speed, one that accelerated beyond him, who absorbed forbidden knowledge so rapidly that the balance of power inverted in record time. That apprentice was Freedon Nadd. Greetings lore junkies, and welcome to the archives. In this video we will break down exactly what Naga Sadow passed on, why those teachings were given so freely, and how this singular deviation from Sith tradition did not secure Naga Sadow's legacy, but forged the perfect architect for his destruction, and in doing that, elevated one of the most dangerous Sith Lords ever. When Naga Sadow arrived on Yavin 4, he was a Dark Lord without an empire. The war had shattered his forces, the Republic had pushed the Sith into total collapse, and the galaxy he once sought to dominate had moved on. What remained was a distant, untamed moon far beyond the political heart of the Sith. It is in that isolation that Naga turned completely to his work. Freed from the conflicts and rivalries that had once defined the society of the Sith, Naga devoted himself to exploration of the dark side with an intensity that few Sith Lords ever achieved. Yavin 4 became the center of his experiments, a place where alchemy, ritual, and force study would advance without interruption, and over time, his research deepened. Naga Sadow refined techniques, he expanded rituals, and pushed Sith alchemy into increasingly extreme territory. Creatures were reformed, life forms altered, and the boundaries between biological manipulation and the dark side became increasingly blurred. Among his most famous creations was the colossal Sith Warworm. But Sadow's efforts were never limited to physical creations. Within the temples of Yavin, he safeguarded Sith knowledge itself. The ancient teachings, historical texts, and doctrinal foundations were preserved with extraordinary care. Sadow ensured that the intellectual and the philosophical edge of the Sith would not disappear when the Empire fell. Yavin 4 became something more than Exile. It became a vault of continuity for the Sith. And eventually, after decades of uninterrupted research, Naga made a decision that defined the final chapter of his life. He entered stasis. Sadow believed that the galaxy would one day produce a successor worthy of his knowledge, someone strong enough to inherit what he had preserved, powerful enough to carry it forward. And so he waited. What ultimately answered Sadow's long exile wasn't an army, it was a young man, a boy the Sith would later recognize as a familiar archetype, someone scorned by the galaxy, but better, rejected by the Jedi. His name was Freedon. Freedon Nadd had been tested by the Jedi, and his rejection was not born of weakness or lack of ability, but of something more dangerous to them: emotion. And in the aftermath of rejection, Freedon made a mistake that would define his life, as well as the Sith. When he confronted his Jedi Master, when tension suppressed through rage finally boiled over, he struck her down, an act committed in anger. Immediately he was swelled with regret, but regret was fragile when filtered through bitterness. Freedon did not condemn himself, he condemned the Jedi. He reframed the event not as a failure, but as a betrayal, not as a loss of control on his part, but as proof that the Jedi never understood him. Now severed from the Jedi, Freedon fled, turning his gaze towards the same forbidden horizon that had tempted countless seekers before him. He sought power. For generations, the Jedi pursued the remnants of the Sith not to claim that power, but to erase it. Freedon, however, possessed a distinct advantage. He no longer resisted the dark side. He had embraced it. And with that surrender came something intoxicating. New channels of power that did not open gradually, but they surged, like adrenaline, like a high. A sudden expansion of his eye. Freedon moved through the ruins of what remained of Sith space, navigating the aftermath of the devastation, probing shadows that the Jedi had dismissed as empty, until something answered. A whisper, a disturbance, a presence faint enough to escape Jedi concern, yet undeniable to one reaching for the dark. It led him to the jungle moon of Yavin 4, a world the Jedi believed was nothing of consequence. But there, a being festered, a former Dark Lord, reduced now to little more than an echo, a lingering fracture. Behind that whisper waited access to something Freedon Nadd had never truly encountered. Unfiltered Sith knowledge, unrestrained power, a wholly unique Sith. When Naga Sadow awoke, something unprecedented happened. He broke the chain. Naga Sadow did something no Sith before him had ever done, and something no Sith after would willingly repeat. He did not ration his power. He didn't obscure any of the knowledge. He was elated. Elated that the Sith would endure. Elated that his legacy had not dissolved into myth. He gave Freedon Nadd everything. All of the advancements he had made and all of the discoveries. All of the evolutions of power forged in centuries of isolation. These teachings can be understood through 4 central disciplines. 4 lessons that Naga Sadow taught to Freedon Nadd. 4 thresholds of the dark side. The first was Sith alchemy. Under his guidance, Nadd learned to view life not as sacred, but as malleable. The process was grotesque. Bodies trembling as unseen forces reshaped muscle, bone, and form. Flesh twisted, structures collapsed and reformed. The dark side rewrote biology like a cruel sculptor working within living clay. The next lesson was ritualism. Naga Sadow revealed how power could be magnified through ceremony and impulse. Vast temple chambers, ancient symbols carved deep in the stone, energy gathering slowly, thickening like pressure. The force seemed to warp under the ritual's weight, resisting at first, but ultimately breaking. Then came illusion craft. Few abilities better embody Naga Sadow's mastery. Entire realities could be fabricated. Phantom fleets suspended in orbit. Spectral armies advancing across empty ground. The terror of the technique was not merely what it created, but how it replaced truth. And then, finally, domination of the dark side. Beyond any mechanics and rituals, Naga Sadow passed on the core Sith truth. Power was not to be harmonized with, it was to be seized. This meant violence, lightning erupting from hands, shockwaves tearing through space. Environments changed forever through raw, unrestrained will. But worst of all, Naga Sadow passed on a great sin: to fracture one's existence and remain beyond death. This was not preservation, it was an act of a violent resistance against the natural order. Sith tearing their essence free from the body and anchoring it to a reality through sheer will. A technique as rare as it was catastrophic. Naga Sadow placed all of this knowledge directly at the feet of Freedon Nadd. He gave him every single discipline. The boy was no longer a Jedi at all. He was something worse. A being swollen with knowledge, intoxicated by power, utterly convinced that he had ascended beyond the limits that had restrained every force wielder before him. And then, something shockingly anticlimactic happens. Freedon Nadd simply kills Naga Sadow. There is absolutely no deception or a grand betrayal. It is a quiet, brutal conclusion to a Sith lineage that once shook the galaxy. This is so jarring because Naga Sadow was a Sith Lord defined by his ambition, by a relentless drive to push the boundaries of knowledge and power. This was a man who saw himself as the natural successor to Marka Ragnos, who believed his vision alone could drag the Empire into galactic dominance. He is a man who gambled the survival of an entire civilization on the promise of conquest. The same man now falls not in a war, not at the hands of the Jedi, but at the hands of an apprentice that he empowered with everything. But his legacy resists easy interpretation. While one reading paints him as a catastrophically arrogant man, blinded by his own sense, there is another more unsettling option. Perhaps he was isolated for centuries and consumed by the collapse of his empire. Perhaps Naga Sadow genuinely believed that the future of the Sith required something greater than himself, that Freedon Nadd was not just a student, but a full successor. That without knowledge would have been a betrayal of the very legacy of the Sith. So here are the two paths. Was the death of Naga Sadow arrogance, or was it desperation? Was it something approaching even selflessness? In writing this video, something really started to stand out. In many ways, Naga Sadow almost feels like the Sith version of Yoda, a towering figure emerging during a time when the Sith are on the back foot, when the Jedi and the Republic have cemented themselves as the dominant power in the galaxy. And what has always fascinated me is just how important Naga Sadow actually is to the history of the Sith. He led the Great Hyperspace War, the first time there was open conflict from the Jedi and Sith for the heart of the Republic. The first era where Jedi and Sith openly clash on a massive scale, not in shadows, but on battlefields. And yet, it's striking how his story ends. This terrifying architect of war, this political force, a figure who reshaped the trajectory of the Sith. There is no monumental stand, there's no duel. Instead, he vanishes, quietly, abruptly, overshadowed entirely by the rise of Freedon Nadd. So how did Naga Sadow truly view his apprentice? Because Freedon was not born a Sith, he was a fallen Jedi. He was a broken product of the very order the Sith defined themselves against. But I think that this may have been perfect. After all, the foundation of Sith civilization as we recognize it was built by outsiders, the 12 Dark Jedi, who were exiles and invaders. In this sense, Freedon Nadd is not an outsider. He's a continuation of the same pattern. And when we actually look at Naga Sadow, the symmetry is even more striking. Naga Sadow himself was a hybrid, a product of intermingling between the Sith purebloods and the Dark Jedi lineage. So it becomes easy to imagine that Naga Sadow did not see Freedon as an outsider, but as an inheritor. But we think it goes even deeper. The Sith of the era of Naga Sadow hated the Jedi as rivals, as ideological enemies who stood in opposition. But Freedon's hatred was more volatile. His hatred was emotional, personal, from rejection and scorn, from dismissal, from being denied the very order that claimed to understand the Force. Freedon Nadd did not just want to defeat the Jedi. He needed to prove himself definitively greater than them, stand before them as a living condemnation of judgment. And it is difficult to imagine that Naga Sadow did not recognize this terrifying potential. But we are again left with the question, what happened in the final moments of Naga Sadow? The lore gives us no definitive answer, but the ambiguity is what makes the story fascinating. His death either represents ultimate failure of Sith arrogance, or one of the most unsettling acts of Sith conviction ever depicted. So now I want to know what you think. Which version of Naga Sadow's end do you believe is more likely? Was he destroyed by the apprentice that he empowered? Or did he walk knowingly towards extinction, convinced that the future of the Sith required it? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the Force serve you.